In this video, I'm going to introduce you to 100 idioms used by native speakers that you can use in the IELTS speaking and in the IELTS writing tests, and also in everyday English and business English too. Now, a lot of idioms videos tend to teach you things like "it was raining cats and dogs" or "beat around the bush." But to be honest, native speakers don't really use idioms like these, and if you do use them in the IELTS test, then you'll sound a little bit unnatural. So in this video, you're going to learn 100 idioms that native speakers actually use, and which will make you sound more natural if you use them in an appropriate way. I will give you definitions for each idiom, as well as 3 example sentences for each idiom, and these will show you how to use the idioms in a natural way. I've also produced a workbook to help you learn these 100 idioms. The workbook contains all of the definitions and also all of the example sentences that you'll see in this video, plus lots of practice exercises to help you learn each idiom. The link to the workbook is in the description right below the video. So just click on the link and I will send you the workbook by email. And don't worry, it's completely free. And I'll also send you lots more free materials and videos in the future. So let's get started now with the first of the 100 idioms.
Let's begin with the first idiom, which is bear in mind. Bear in mind. This has nothing to do with having a bear, the animal, inside your head, because of course it's an idiom, so it doesn't mean exactly what it says. As an idiom, what this means is to remember or to consider something. For example, it's important to bear in mind the environmental impact of our actions. So in other words, it's important to consider the environmental impact of our actions. Bear in mind that learning a language takes time and patience, so you must remember this. So as you can see, it can go at the start of a sentence. You can also split this idiomatic phrase. We must bear cultural differences in mind when travelling abroad. So you can bear something in mind, or you can bear in mind something. The first sentence could have been, it's important to bear the environmental impact of our actions in mind. So you can split the phrase. The second idiom is at the end of the day. At the end of the day. So this doesn't mean literally the end of the day. It means when everything is taken into consideration. As in this sentence, at the end of the day, it's the contributions we make that matter most. So perhaps you're talking about life. So when everything is taken into consideration, it's the contributions that are most important, that matter most. At the end of the day, what you choose to study should align with your passions. So when everything else is taken into consideration, what you choose to study should align with your passions. Your health is more important than work at the end of the day. So the phrase can go at the end of the sentence as well as the start. The next idiom, the bottom line. The bottom line. And this means the most important aspect of something. For example, when choosing a university, the bottom line for many students is the cost of tuition. The cost of tuition is the most important aspect when they choose a university. It's the bottom line. So it's the line they won't go underneath. It's the baseline. When considering job offers, the bottom line is often the salary and benefits. So that's the most important aspect. The bottom line is that if we don't act now, climate change will worsen. The next idiom, take on board. Take on board. And this means to consider or to accept new ideas or new suggestions or new information. For example, I appreciated her feedback and I took it on board. So I considered her feedback. I thought about it. It's essential to take advice from your doctor on board. So as you can see, you can split the phrase here. So take on board, and we're taking on board advice, so suggestions. I'll definitely take on board what he said about improving my English. The next idiom, by and large. By and large. This means for the most part, or mostly. By and large, people are satisfied with their jobs. This doesn't mean most people. It simply means for the most part, people are satisfied. People are mostly satisfied with their jobs. By and large, studying abroad provides great opportunities for personal growth. So for the most part, studying abroad does this. By and large, the majority of people find dieting challenging. So for the most part, mostly, people find it challenging. And the next idiom, take for granted. Take for granted. This has two meanings. The first is to assume something is true, usually without questioning it. The second meaning is to fail to appreciate something. For example, many people take clean water for granted. So here we fail to appreciate clean water because in some countries people don't have clean water. People who live in countries that do have clean water often fail to appreciate it, so they take it for granted. We shouldn't take for granted the small acts of kindness we experience daily, so we shouldn't fail to appreciate those things. Don't take your health for granted is one of the most valuable things you have, so don't fail to appreciate your health. The next idiom, along the lines of. Along the lines of. And this means similar in type or roughly comparable. For example, I'm looking for a job along the lines of public relations. So, similar to public relations. If they're interested in history, a topic along the lines of ancient civilizations could work well. Can you suggest a book along the lines of that one, but it's a bit easier? So a similar book, roughly comparable, but a bit easier. And the next idiom, at the back of my mind. At the back of my mind. So this doesn't mean literally what it says, at the back of my brain. It means in one's thoughts, in my thoughts, in your thoughts, but not at the forefront of our thoughts. For example, I tried to enjoy the movie, but tomorrow's job interview was always at the back of my mind. So I was watching the movie, but all the time, thinking about the job interview tomorrow was there in my thoughts. The movie was at the forefront of my thoughts, but thinking about the job interview, it was always there, kind of nagging at the back of my thinking. While I'm working, there's always a deadline at the back of my mind. So I'm thinking most of all about my work, but at the back of my mind, there's a deadline to meet. At the back of my mind, I kept thinking about how I could improve my fluency. The next idiom, sit on the fence. Sit on the fence, which sounds like an extremely uncomfortable thing to do, but as an idiom, it doesn't mean exactly that. It means to be undecided or to not take sides in a dispute, in an argument. For example, I usually sit on the fence in discussions about controversial topics as I don't want to offend anyone. I don't take sides in these discussions. When asked about my career choice, I tried not to sit on the fence and gave a definite answer. Always a good idea in interviews, especially in English speaking tests like the IELTS test. Don't sit on the fence, give your opinions, give a definite answer. Some people sit on the fence when it comes to environmental issues, but I think it's time to act. The next idiom, in the long run. In the long run. Nothing to do with running. It simply means over an extended period of time, as in these sentences. While it may seem boring, studying grammar will help me in the long run with writing and speaking. So studying grammar will help me over an extended period of time with writing and speaking. In the long run, investing in education pays off with better job opportunities. So over an extended period of time, you'll get better job opportunities. Although the project is challenging now, it will be worth it in the long run, over an extended period of time. The next idiom, the driving force. The driving force. And this means the main factor that causes something to happen. Her vision was the driving force behind the project's success. Her vision was the main factor behind the success of the project. It was the driving force. It made it happen. He became the driving force in my life. People often have a driving force. It may be a person, it may be a dream, and it's the main factor that causes something to happen in your life. The driving force behind my mother's success was her determination. Her determination was the main factor. It was the driving force. On the face of it, nothing to do with the face. It means based on an initial appearance or seemingly. For example, on the face of it, the solution seems simple, but it's actually quite complex. So based on an initial appearance, the solution seems simple, but it's complex when you really think about it. The plan looks good on the face of it, but it still needs more thought. So on an initial appearance, it looks good, but. So we often follow on the face of it with a but, with a contrast. On the face of it, her argument was persuasive, but the facts didn't add up. On the face of it, something seemed simple or persuasive or good, but when you really look at it, it's different. In light of is the next idiom, and this means because of or considering. For example, in light of recent events, we should consider our approach. Because of recent events, we should reconsider our approach. In light of the evidence, we need to act swiftly. So because of the evidence or considering the evidence. In light of her contributions, she deserves the recognition she's getting. So because of her contributions. The next idiom, come into play. Come into play. This means to become a factor or an influence in a situation. For example, different factors come into play when making a decision like this. Different factors come into play. So they influence a decision. So different factors influence a situation or a decision. Personal preferences also come into play when making important decisions. Cultural differences come into play when working with international teams. So cultural differences are a factor when working with international teams. It's something you must think about. The next idiom, gold standard. Gold standard. We talk about the gold standard, and this is the most or the best reliable example of something. The best or most reliable example. This research is considered the gold standard in its field. For decades, this test has been the gold standard in education. It's been the most reliable exam, the most reliable test. Their service is often considered the gold standard for customer care. The next idiom is, what on earth? What on earth? It doesn't have anything to do with planet Earth. It's a phrase that's used to express surprise or disbelief. Very useful if you're telling a story. What on earth were you thinking when you made that decision? So this expresses disbelief about the decision. What on earth were you thinking? What on earth is going on in this room? So this is surprise. Maybe there's fighting or mayhem. This is a phrase that's often used by teachers when they walk into a room full of children who are making lots of noise. What on earth is going on in this room? What on earth did they say to make you so upset? So this indicates surprise, maybe disbelief. It depends on the context. So they're surprised that you're so upset. The next idiom, it goes without saying. It goes without saying. But actually, this is often to emphasize something. And it's used to indicate something that's obvious or as expected. It goes without saying that hard work leads to success. It's obvious. It goes without saying, even though people do say it. It goes without saying that we should respect others. It goes without saying that family comes first. So these are kind of obvious things that go without saying, but maybe they do need to be stated from time to time. Trial and error. Trial and error is the next idiom. This means a process of experimenting until a solution is found. Learning through trial and error is often the best way to improve. So you make mistakes, you learn from those mistakes. The device was perfected through years of trial and error. So the device went through a process of experimenting, of experimentation, until it was made perfect or near perfect. I learned how to cook by trial and error over the years. So lots of experimentation. Over the top. Over the top. This means excessive or exaggerated. For example, some of the demands they made were over the top and unreasonable. So they were excessive demands. His reaction to the news was completely over the top. So it may have been very, very angry or very, very excited. It was completely over the top. It was too much. It was excessive for what the news was really about. The prices they are charging seem a little over the top. They're excessive. They're too expensive. Down the line. Down the line. This means at a later time. We'll see the benefits of this further down the line. So at a later time. And this idiom often goes with the word further down the line. Decisions made now will undoubtedly affect us down the line. At a later time, we'll only know the real impact of this decision further down the line. At a later time. And the next idiom, state of the art. State of the art. This means very modern and using the most recent technologies, often used in association with technology. Their latest product uses state-of-the-art technology to stay ahead of competitors. They have state-of-the-art equipment in the local hospital, so maybe scanners, X-ray machines. The engineers developed a state-of-the-art solution to the problem. So it doesn't mean anything about art. It's to do with technology. Cutting edge is another similar phrase, very modern. Bear with me. Bear with me is an idiom that I thought I would use because I kept on hearing it in a hospital one day. It means be patient with me. Often while someone else is finishing a task. Bear with me while I find out. There's a bit of a delay, so bear with me while I sort things out. I know this is taking a while, but please bear with me. We're almost done. So if you go into a hospital and ask a nurse to do something, or if you ask a nurse a question, they will often say, bear with me a moment while I find out. It just simply means be patient while I finish the task for you. Stepping stone. Stepping stone. Now, literally, a stepping stone is a stone in a river which you step on to cross the river. Usually a very small river, a stream. But in its idiomatic sense, it means an action or an event that helps a person to make progress towards a goal. A stepping stone towards a goal. This position could be a stepping stone to a more senior role. So this position is a thing that will help me get to a bigger goal, a senior role. Internships are often used as a stepping stone to permanent employment. Volunteering can be a valuable stepping stone to a career in the non-profit sector. So something you can use to make progress to a career. From scratch. From scratch. Nothing to do with scratching. It means starting from the beginning with no prior preparation. I built the business from scratch with no outside investment. In other words, I did it all myself from the beginning. Started with nothing. Starting from scratch can be daunting, but it's also incredibly rewarding. He built the company from scratch, starting with just one employee. The next idiom, bridge the gap. Bridge the gap. This means to connect two things or to reduce the difference between them. Kind of like a bridge does. We need to bridge the gap between theory and practice in education. So here you're bridging the gap, you're trying to reduce the difference between theory and practice. This initiative aims to bridge the gap between the rich and poor, to reduce the difference between rich and poor. I want to bridge the gap between recent immigrants and locals, so to reduce the difference between them, to help them understand each other better. We often talk about bridging the gap in understanding, to help people understand better. The big picture. The big picture. This is the overall perspective or objective, not just the details. For example, focusing on the big picture can help you stay motivated. So focusing on the overall perspective, and in this case, the objective, that can help you stay motivated. Think about your dreams, your ultimate goal. That can help you stay motivated. It's the big picture. Looking at the big picture helps you understand how all the parts fit together. So here we're looking at the overall perspective of something, not the details. To succeed, you have to be able to see the big picture and not get lost in details. In the early days. In the early days. This means in the beginning stages of an activity or period. The early days of an activity are the beginning, when you get started. In the early days of the company, we had to make do with very limited resources. In the beginning of the company. In the early days of photography, people didn't understand its potential. So when photography began, in the early days of the internet, few imagined it would change the world so much. Get one's head around. To get one's head around, to get my head around something, get your head around. This means to understand or come to terms with something. You get your head around it. It took me a while to get my head around the ideas in the book. In other words, it took me a while to understand the ideas. I'm still trying to get my head around how this system works. It's difficult to get your head around such a complex topic in a short amount of time. It's difficult to understand it. The next idiom, go hand in hand with. Go hand in hand with. This means to be closely connected with something and to affect each other. For example, creativity often goes hand in hand with innovation in successful projects. So creativity and innovation are closely connected and they affect each other. Good communication skills often go hand in hand with effective leadership. So communication skills and effective leadership often go together. Environmental sustainability can go hand in hand with economic growth. They can go together. The next idiom, keep an eye on. Keep an eye on. This means to watch or to monitor something carefully. Make sure to keep an eye on the time during your presentation. So you need to watch the time during your presentation. It's crucial to keep an eye on your expenses if you want to stay within budget. So monitor your expenses. Keep an eye on your health, especially when you're under a lot of stress. So monitor your health, especially when you're under stress. Doesn't mean take your eye out of your head and put it on something simply means watch or monitor. The next idiom is hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. This has nothing to do with hanging on to the minute hand of a clock. It's an idiom again, and it simply means wait a moment. And it's an informal way of telling someone to wait a moment. For example, hang on a minute. I need to check something before we proceed. So here, I'm asking someone to just wait a moment while I check something. Hang on a minute. I need to gather my thoughts before answering. Hang on a minute. Something's wrong. The next idiom, on the spot. On the spot. And this means immediately or without delay. For example, she was asked to give a presentation on the spot without any preparation. Immediately. The interviewer asked me a difficult question on the spot. He was forced to make a decision on the spot without talking to anyone. So immediately, without delay. The next idiom, get to grips with. Get to grips with. If you grip something, then you hold it. But in an idiom, you're kind of holding an idea. So get to grips with means to begin to understand or to begin to deal with something difficult. It took me some time to get to grips with the new schedule. So it took me some time to begin to understand the new schedule because it was quite difficult to understand. Once you get to grips with the new system, it becomes much easier to use. It's difficult to get to grips with complex financial systems at first. It's difficult to understand them. The next idiom, go through the roof. Go through the roof. So this does not literally mean going through the roof of a house. It means to increase or to rise rapidly. After the announcement, ticket sales went through the roof. So the ticket sales increased in price very quickly, very rapidly. My excitement went through the roof when I won the prize. So I got really excited. The price of petrol went through the roof after the war began. So prices increased rapidly. Through the roof can also mean getting really angry. The next idiom, come full circle. Come full circle. This means to return to the original position or situation. For example, after working in various fields, I feel like my career has come full circle. So it's gone back to the original position, maybe the same job. After all these years, I feel like I've come full circle and returned to my original passion. My career has come full circle as I'm now working in the same industry I started in, so back to the original position or situation. That's another story. That's another story. This means that's a different issue or a different matter altogether, and suggests that you're not going to talk about it at this particular moment because it's another story. I'd love to tell you more, but that's another story through a different time. That's another story, and it will take too long to explain right now. That's an interesting point, but that's another story altogether. So maybe they'll talk about it another time. It's not relevant right now. How on earth? How on earth? Earlier we had the idiom what on earth, but how on earth? is used to express surprise or disbelief. How on earth did you manage to finish that essay so quickly? How on earth did you manage to organise such a large event by yourself? How on earth can I be expected to do this all by myself? So it's indicating surprise or disbelief. It goes at the start of a sentence. It has nothing to do with the planet Earth. It's just surprise or disbelief. How can I do this? Cast one's mind back. Cast one's mind back. So maybe cast my mind back. Cast your mind back. And this means to think back to a particular time or a particular event in the past. For example, cast your mind back to when we first met. It was such a memorable occasion. So that you're telling your friend to think back to when we first met. Cast your mind back. If you cast your mind back, you might remember the previous discussion we had. I cast my mind back to the day I joined the company. So that's the past tense. The past of cast is cast. It's an irregular past tense, not casted. The next idiom is last resort. Last resort. Nothing to do with a holiday resort. This means the final option. After all others have been tried, it's the last resort. As a last resort, they decided to call the emergency services. The last resort is to ask for a bank loan. So it's the final option. I can't get any money any other way. I've got to ask the bank. If all else fails, we can use this plan as a last resort, as a final option. And the next idiom? Ring a bell. Ring a bell. This has nothing to do with ringing a bell. As an idiom, it means to sound familiar. To sound familiar. Does the name John Smith ring a bell? I think we met him last year. So maybe the name John Smith sounds familiar. That song rings a bell, but I can't quite place where I've heard it. Her face rings a bell, but I can't remember where I know her from. That's something I commonly think about. I see people's faces, and their faces ring a bell. In other words, I seem to remember them, but not quite sure. The next idiom is the good old days. The good old days, and this is a nostalgic reference to a past period seen as better or as happier. So if you think about times in the past that were better or happier, we often talk about it as the good old days. Old people often talk about the good old days when they were young. Back in the good old days, we didn't rely so much on technology. In the good old days, people spent more time interacting face to face. Some people long for the good old days, while others embrace change. And the next idiom, a grey area. A grey area. This has nothing to do with grey, the colour. It's a situation or a topic that is not clearly defined, that's ambiguous. The situation is a grey area, and it's hard to know what the right decision is. So it's a situation, it's not clearly defined, and so it's hard to know what decision to take. You don't have enough information, perhaps. The law surrounding that issue is a bit of a grey area, so it's open to interpretation. So here the law is not clear, it's not clearly defined. The rule on this is a grey area, which is why so many people break it. Out of the blue. Out of the blue. This is an idiom which means unexpectedly or without warning. I received a call from an old school friend out of the blue. So suddenly they phoned up. Out of the blue. No warning at all. Out of the blue, I decided to quit my job and move abroad. Completely out of the blue, she offered me a job. So it was totally unexpected. The next idiom, golden age. Golden age. This is similar to the good old days in a way. But it's a period of great success or a period of prosperity or great achievement. We often talk about historical golden ages when great things happened. Many people refer to the 1980s as the golden age of cinema because there were lots of great films, successful films. Some believe we are currently living in a new golden age of technology. Historians often debate which period can truly be called the golden age of art. The next idiom, touchy-feely. Touchy-feely. I thought I'd put this into the collection, even though it's being used less and less, but it's still quite useful. It means, and it's quite a complicated idiom, it means loving and kind, especially through physical contact, and nowadays is often seen as something negative. Touchy-feely kind of refers to touching, but it also can refer more generally to somebody who's loving and kind. But like I say, increasingly it's seen as a negative thing. His approach was too touchy-feely for a professional setting. So maybe this is a manager who touches people on the arm too much. I'm not a fan of touchy-feely discussions during team meetings. So this is when it's used not for physical contact, but it's maybe talking about emotions. So touchy-feely can also refer to emotions when you're talking about emotions. So touchy-feely discussions will talk about emotions a lot, how you feel. Some leaders prefer to avoid being too touchy-feely in their communication style. So unemotional. So they prefer to avoid being too emotional in their communication style. The next idiom, spring to mind. Spring to mind. And this means to suddenly think of something. For example, when I think of great leaders, several names spring to mind. Several names suddenly come to mind. I can think of several names. When I think of great vacation spots, Thailand springs to mind. If you're talking about innovation, a few tech giants spring to mind. They suddenly come into my head. Have a stab at. Have a stab at. And this idiom means to try or attempt something. Something that may be quite difficult to do at first, but I'm going to have a stab at it anyway. I'll have a stab at answering that question, even though I'm not certain of the answer, but I'll have a stab at answering it. I'll try. I'll have a stab at solving the puzzle, but it looks quite challenging. I'll have a stab at preparing the presentation, but I might need some help. And the next idiom, get the picture. Get the picture. This means to understand a situation. For example, after he explained the situation, I finally started to get the picture. I finally started to understand the situation. I didn't understand at first, but now I get the picture. Now I understand. I get the picture. After listening carefully, I finally got the picture of what they were trying to achieve. It's the past tense use of the idiom got the picture. And the next idiom, the high point. The high point. This means the most enjoyable or significant part of an event or a period. The most enjoyable or significant. The high point. The high point of the event was definitely the keynote speech. So this was the most important part, or maybe the most enjoyable part of the event. The high point of my trip was seeing the Northern Lights for the first time, the most enjoyable, or perhaps the most important, most memorable part of the trip. The networking opportunities were the high point of the conference, so the most significant part. And the next idiom, idiom number 50, we're halfway there. Do the job. Do the job. And this means to be effective or successful. For example, it may not be perfect, but this solution will definitely do the job for now. So this solution will be effective for now. It'll do the job. It'll be enough. My phone may be old, but it still does the job effectively. It still works. These new shoes are definitely doing the job. They're very effective. So we talk about do the job as it relates to objects usually. So that's idiom number 50, do the job. And the next idiom is move the goalposts. Move the goalposts. This means to change the rules or to change conditions in a way that makes it more difficult to achieve something. For example, just when I was about to finish the essay, my tutor decided to move the goalposts and change the assessment criteria. So it made it more difficult to have finished the essay. The assessment conditions were changed. It feels like they keep moving the goalposts, making it harder for us to achieve our goals. They keep moving the goalposts, which makes it nearly impossible to meet their expectations. The next idiom, behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. This means happening privately without being known or without being seen by the public. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make these events run smoothly. So nobody sees a lot of the work that makes these events run smoothly because it happens behind the scenes. So the general public don't see it. You don't see it, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of effort involved in organizing this. Most people don't realize how much happens behind the scenes in a big production, maybe a big movie production. So there's lots of people doing things behind the scenes. It's not just the actors and actresses. On the back burner. On the back burner. This idiom means delayed or postponed for future consideration. So you often put ideas or projects on the back burner. I put the project on the back burner for now as I've got other priorities. We've put that idea on the back burner for now, but we'll return to it later. For now, the idea will stay on the back burner until I have more resources, so it'll be delayed or postponed into the future. The next idiom, bog standard. Bog standard. This means completely ordinary or unremarkable. So things are bog standard if they're ordinary or unremarkable. The solution they offered was pretty bog standard, nothing special. My car is bog standard, without any extra features, but it gets the job done. His work was bog standard. Nothing extraordinary, but functional. It was just about good enough. Nothing remarkable. It was bog standard. And the next idiom is out of one's hands. Out of my hands, out of your hands, out of their hands. This means beyond somebody's control, beyond one's control or responsibility. For example, the decision is out of my hands now. I've done all I can. The outcome is out of their hands now. They just have to wait. Once the application is submitted, it's out of my hands whether they accept it or not. So it'll be beyond my control. And the next idiom, call the cavalry. Call the cavalry. Cavalry is a word that refers to soldiers on horseback. So we don't have cavalry now in the armed forces, but we used to. So soldiers on horseback. But this has nothing to do with soldiers on horseback in the idiom. It simply means to call for help, especially from people in authority or from people with more power. It was often a phrase used related to Western movies in the United States, where they called the cavalry when they needed extra help. We were in such a mess, I thought it was time to call the cavalry for help. We're not calling soldiers, we're calling from people with more power. When things got too chaotic, we had no choice but to call the cavalry. It's time to call the cavalry. I need more help to finish this on time. And the next idiom, beg the question. Beg the question. This means to raise a question or to raise a point that needs to be addressed. That statement begs the question, why weren't these issues addressed sooner? His actions beg the question of whether he's truly committed to the team. So it raises the question. That decision really begs the question of whether they considered all the consequences. So it raises the question of whether they considered the consequences. And the next idiom is to get something straight. Get something straight or get straight. This means to clarify or to understand something correctly. But it's quite a direct, maybe abrupt way of asking for clarification. If you're doing a speaking test like the IELTS test, I wouldn't say to the examiner, let's get something straight. It sounds a bit rude. So it's quite a direct way of asking for clarification. Before we continue, let's get something straight about our responsibilities. So this is a very direct way of asking for clarification about responsibilities. I want to get something straight. Are we meeting on Thursday or Friday? Let's get something straight. Are we going ahead with this plan or not? This is very blunt, very direct. So it's not a particularly polite way of asking for clarification. The next idiom is boil down to. Boil down to. And this means to be the essential or to be the most important aspect of something. For example, in the end, success really boils down to hard work and perseverance. It's the most essential aspect of success is hard work and perseverance. It all boils down to how much effort you're willing to put in. At the end of the day, that's that idiom again, at the end of the day, it all boils down to how well you prepare. So how well you prepare is the most important aspect. Idiom number 60 is get one's act together. Get my act together, get your act together. This means to organize oneself or one's affairs so as to achieve something. I really need to get my act together if I want to make progress. I've got to get organized if I want to make progress. If he doesn't get his act together soon, he'll miss the opportunity. He won't be able to achieve it. He's got to get himself organized quickly. He's got to get his act together. He managed to get his act together just in time for the deadline. So he managed to organize himself just in time. And the next idiom, fall into place. Fall into place. This means to start to happen in a satisfactory way without problems. Almost like things happen naturally, they fall into place. After a lot of hard work, everything started to fall into place. So there were no problems. After weeks of confusion, everything finally began to fall into place. As the project progressed, things started to fall into place naturally. So they started to happen in a satisfactory way. Let's look at the next idiom. So far, so good. So far, so good. This means things are going well so far. Things are going well. We've encountered a few challenges, but so far, so good. So up to now, things are going well. I've just started this new project and so far, so good. So things are going well with the project. We're only halfway through the course, but so far, so good. Things are going well. They're enjoying the course, learning something from the course. Things are going well. So far, so good. The next idiom, in the same boat. In the same boat. This has nothing to do with being in a boat. It means in the same difficult or unfortunate situation. It's a problematic situation. Difficult, unfortunate. For example, we're all in the same boat, trying to navigate these uncertain times. So maybe we're talking here about companies in the same boat. We're all in the same boat, trying to adjust to the new work schedule. Since I'm in the same boat as you, we should support each other. So in the same difficult or unfortunate situation, we're in the same boat. Kicking and screaming is the next idiom. Kicking and screaming. This means reluctantly and with a lot of resistance. So you can be kicking and screaming when you don't want to do something, when you really don't want to do it. I used to go to the dentist kicking and screaming, not wanting to go, very reluctant. They dragged me kicking and screaming to my first day of school. This may have been literally the case, of course. If you're a very young child, you may go to school kicking and screaming, literally, physically, because you don't want to do it. But it can also mean idiomatically, as in this sentence. He agreed to the new rules, though it was clear he did so kicking and screaming. He wasn't literally kicking and screaming. He was doing it reluctantly. The next idiom, rule of thumb. Rule of thumb. This has nothing to do with a thumb. It means a general principle based on experience or based on practice. For example, as a rule of thumb, I always double check my work before submitting it. So it's a general principle that I do. I always double check my work. A good rule of thumb is to always save a portion of your income. It's a good general principle. As a rule of thumb, I try to exercise at least 3 times a week. The phrase as a rule of thumb is very common with this idiom. And the next idiom, can't put my finger on something. This means unable to identify or unable to understand something precisely. There's something wrong with this plan, but I can't put my finger on it. So I can't identify exactly what's wrong with this plan. I can't put my finger on it. I'm not sure what it is. I know there's an issue here, but I can't quite put my finger on exactly what it is. I've seen it before, but I can't quite put my finger on where. As you can see, the last 2 sentences, can't quite put my finger on something, is a very common way of using this phrase. Can't quite put my finger on something. And the next idiom, go in one ear and out the other. Go in one ear and out the other. And this means to be heard, but immediately forgotten or ignored. People's names often go in one ear and out the other. I don't remember them when I'm told them. Here's some example sentences. Whenever I explain something to him, it just goes in one ear and out the other. He doesn't listen. He forgets it straight away. You can explain it all you want, but for some people, it just goes in one ear and out the other. I've told him the same thing several times, but it just goes in one ear and out the other. Or it's immediately forgotten or ignored. The next idiom, in a nutshell. In a nutshell. Nothing to do with nuts. It means in summary or briefly. This is an informal way of talking about a summary of something. In a nutshell, the project was a huge success despite the initial setbacks. So briefly, in brief, the project was a huge success. In a nutshell, the trip was amazing, despite a few problems along the way. In a nutshell, the lecture was useful, but ran a bit longer than expected. So, in summary. So, don't use this in writing. It's a very informal way of talking about a summary. It's just something that you would use in spoken English. The next idiom is set the scene. Set the scene. And this means to describe a situation so that someone can understand what is happening. For example, before starting my story, I'll set the scene by providing some background information. The narrator set the scene perfectly, making us feel as if we were in the story. So we described the situation perfectly. So it was easy to understand. Felt like you're in the story. Before the movie starts, they set the scene by showing a few short clips. Idiom number 70 is make up one's mind. Make up one's mind. Make up my mind. Make up your mind. To make a decision is what this one means, to make a decision. I need to make up my mind about which university to attend soon. So I've got to make a decision. I've got to make up my mind. Make a decision. I finally made up my mind to accept the job offer after weeks of consideration. I finally made the decision. He struggled to make up his mind about whether to stay or leave. He struggled to make a decision about this. And the next idiom is get carried away. Get carried away. This has nothing to do with actually being carried away physically by somebody else. In the idiom, it means to become overly excited or to lose self-control. You get carried away by something. You get too excited by it. I tend to get carried away when I start talking about my hobbies. So I get really excited. Maybe I can't stop talking about it. She got carried away with the decorations and ended up spending more than planned. So she got too excited about the decorations and spent too much money, put too many decorations up, perhaps. It's easy to get carried away when you're excited about something new. The next idiom, it stands to reason. It stands to reason. This means to be logical or to make sense. For example, it stands to reason that if you practice more, you'll improve. So that's the logical way of thinking about it. If you practice more, you'll improve. It stands to reason. It stands to reason that a healthy diet can lead to a longer life. It makes sense. It stands to reason that you'll do better if you prepare thoroughly. It's a logical way of thinking about it. Stands to reason. And the next idiom is play devil's advocate. Play devil's advocate. If you play devil's advocate, then you present a counter-argument for the sake of discussion, not necessarily because you believe the counter-argument, but it's a way of stimulating discussion. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment and suggest an alternative point of view. Again, you might not agree with it, but it's a way of stimulating more discussion. Playing devil's advocate, I would say that the plan might not be as easy as it seems. Sometimes playing devil's advocate helps to test the strength of an argument. And the next idiom, happily ever after. Happily ever after. We often see this phrase in stories. It means a happy ending, especially in a story. They lived happily ever after, or at least that's how the story goes. So there was a happy ending. They lived a long time happily. In most romantic comedies, the couple lives happily ever after by the end. Not everyone gets to live happily ever after, but it's a nice idea. Idiom number 75 is to throw somebody in at the deep end. Throw somebody in at the deep end. This means to put someone into a challenging situation without preparation. Hence the deep end. It's like if you're trying to force somebody to swim who can't really swim. If you throw them in at the deep end, you're almost forcing them to swim. They haven't been able to prepare. They threw me in at the deep end on my first day at the new job, expecting me to manage everything. So it was a very challenging situation. You hadn't been able to prepare for the first day at the new job. He was thrown in at the deep end when his manager left suddenly and he had to take over. I was thrown in at the deep end during my internship, but it helped me learn quickly. The next idiom is have a go. Have a go, and this means to attempt or to try something. For example, I'd love to have a go at rock climbing. It looks like fun. So this means I'd love to try rock climbing. Why don't you have a go at solving this puzzle? It might be fun. I've never tried painting, but I'd like to have a go at it sometime. So I'd like to attempt it. I'd like to try to paint. The next idiom, pat on the back. Pat on the back. This means to give someone praise or a recognition. So it's not physically tapping yourself, patting yourself on the back of your body. It's in the idiomatic sense, it's giving praise or recognition. He deserves a pat on the back for all the hard work he's put into this project. So he deserves praise or recognition. After completing the marathon, she gave herself a well-deserved pat on the back. So she recognized her achievement herself. Maybe she gave herself a treat. He got a pat on the back from his boss for handling the project so well. So it wasn't a physical pat on the back, it was praise or recognition. And the next idiom, sit on one's hands. Sit on one's hands, sit on my hands. This means to do nothing, but especially when action is needed. But you choose to do nothing when action is needed. For example, instead of helping, she just sat on her hands while we did all the work. So action was needed, but she didn't do anything. She sat on her hands. Instead of taking action, they just sat on their hands and waited for someone else to fix the problem. Rather than sitting on their hands, they should have taken more initiative. There was a problem, but they didn't take action. They sat on their hands. The next idiom, throw up one's hands. So not from sitting on your hands to throwing up your hands or throwing up my hands. To throw up one's hands means to show frustration or resignation. After weeks of trying, they threw up their hands in defeat. So they didn't literally rip their hands off their arms and throw them into the air. They just showed frustration or resignation. The situation became so complicated that I threw up my hands in frustration. After trying everything, we threw up our hands and decided to start over. We'd basically resigned and started again. Idiom number 80 is watch this space. Watch this space means to wait and see what happens. We're not sure what the future holds, but watch this space for updates. Wait and see what happens. In other words, things are changing rapidly, so watch this space for new developments. The project is still in its early stages, but watch this space for more updates. So there's going to be changes. Things are going to happen. Get cracking. Get cracking. This means to start working on something quickly. For example, we need to get cracking if we want to finish up this project on time. If we don't get cracking soon, we'll miss the deadline. So we've got to start work on it quickly. It's time to get cracking on that report before it's too late. So it's time to start working on that report quickly before it's too late. We've got to get cracking. We've got to get cracking on the next idiom, and it's have a crack at. So another crack, have a crack at, means to attempt or to try something. So I'd love to have a crack at writing a novel. I'd love to try writing a novel. Why don't you have a crack at solving the problem? You might surprise yourself. I've never tried baking before, but I'd like to have a crack at it this weekend. I'd like to try it this weekend. Similar to have a go, which we looked at earlier. Have a go, have a crack at means to attempt or try something. And the next idiom is a long one, not to put too fine a point on it. Not to put too fine a point on it. It's not used all that often these days. It's a slightly old-fashioned idiom, which means to be blunt or to be direct. Not to put too fine a point on it, but your essay needs more work. Not to put too fine a point on it, but The company needs better leadership. So I'm being blunt here. Not to put too fine a point on it, but your argument has some serious flaws. So it's indicating that you're being blunt or direct. It's quite a long idiom to remember, not to put too fine a point on it. The next idiom is give the game away. Give the game away. Nothing about games, though. It simply means to reveal a secret or to reveal a surprise. I accidentally gave the game away by mentioning the surprise party. So revealing a surprise party is giving the game away. We should have kept the party a secret, but I gave the game away and revealed the secret. She didn't mean to give the game away, but her excitement made it obvious. He gave the game away by laughing when he was supposed to keep the secret. He gave the game away. The next idiom, get a move on. Get a move on. This is quite a blunt or direct way of telling someone to hurry up. Get a move on. Let's get a move on or we'll be late for the meeting. So it's very similar in sense to get cracking, but it simply means something more general, to hurry up. We should get a move on if we want to catch the train on time. We need to get a move on or we'll fall behind schedule. You can also just tell someone to get a move on if you want them to hurry up, but it's not considered polite. It's quite a blunt way of telling somebody to hurry up. The next idiom, hand on heart. Hand on heart. This means to speak honestly and sincerely. Hand on heart, I can say that I tried my best, so I honestly think I tried my best. Hand on heart, I had no idea that the decision would cause such a stir. It's very similar to be honest or honestly. Hand on heart, I truly believe that this is the best solution for everyone. Hand on heart. And the next idiom, put one's head above the parapet. A parapet is kind of like a wall or a fortification on a castle, not something you see every day. So if you put your head above the parapet, then you're taking a risk by expressing an opinion or taking action. If you imagine you're in a castle, perhaps you're a guard, and you stick your head above the parapet, you could get your head shot off by somebody with an arrow or a gun. So that's why it's taking a risk. So when you put your head above the parapet, you take a risk by expressing your opinion or by taking action. For example, by speaking up, she put her head above the parapet. So she took a risk by expressing her opinion, possibly because she might be criticized for her opinion. She might get her idea shot down by somebody. I put my head above the parapet when I suggested some new ideas. Change is often risky, suggesting change. By proposing a new policy, she really put her head above the parapet. Parapet. To put one's head above the parapet. And the next idiom, fair share. Fair share. This means a reasonable portion or amount. For example, I feel like I've done more than my fair share of the work on this team. The phrase more than my fair share is quite common with this idiom. Everyone deserves a fair share of the credit for the success of this project. I think I've contributed my fair share to the team's success over the years, a reasonable portion or amount to the success of the team. The next idiom, to say the least. To say the least. By itself is not clear what it means, but the idiom form means to understate or, to put it mildly, as in this sentence, it was a challenging day to say the least, with so many unexpected issues. So I'm understating it to say that it was a challenging day. It was probably much more than a challenging day. It was very challenging. There were lots of unexpected issues that happened. So it was a challenging day to say the least, to put it mildly. The weather has been unpredictable, to say the least. In Britain, the weather is always changing. One moment it's sunny, the next it's raining and windy. The weather is unpredictable, to say the least. Understates it. The trip was exhausting, to say the least, with delays and cancellations. So it was really tiring. Idiom number 90 is pick and choose. Pick and choose. So if you pick and choose, you have the luxury of selecting from many options. You have a choice, lots of choices. You can't always pick and choose the perfect circumstances, but you can adapt. You can't always pick and choose your teammates, but you can work well with them. You won't always be able to pick and choose the tasks you prefer. So as you can see from these three sentences, pick and choose is often, in fact, most commonly used in a negative sense. You can't pick and choose. You can't always pick and choose. You won't be able to pick and choose. You don't have the luxury. So often this is used in the negative sense when you don't have lots of choice. You don't have the luxury. And the next idiom is at loggerheads. At loggerheads. If you're at loggerheads, then you are in strong disagreement or conflict. It's quite an informal term to use, so I would normally only use it in spoken English. The two departments are at loggerheads over how to implement the new policy, so they are in strong disagreement. I'm at loggerheads with my neighbour because of the noise he's making late at night. So we're at conflict, we're in conflict. They've been at loggerheads for weeks, unable to agree on a contract. So they can't agree, they're in strong disagreement. The next idiom, drag one's feet. Drag one's feet. This means to act slowly or delay something, as if you're not trying to move your feet very quickly, you're dragging them behind you. He tends to drag his feet when it comes to making important decisions. So he delays, doesn't want to make a decision. She's dragging her feet on making a decision about the new proposal. Don't drag your feet on this. We need to make a decision quickly. So as you can see, it's often used when we're talking about making decisions or being reluctant to make decisions. In the driving seat. In the driving seat. This means to be in control or in a dominant position. For example, now that she's in the driving seat, she has the authority to make major changes. So she's in control, she's in the dominant position, so she can change things. With her promotion, she's now firmly in the driving seat of the company. Being in the driving seat comes with a lot of responsibility and pressure. The next idiom, go back to square one. Go back to square one, and this means to start over from the beginning. Similar to going full circle, which we had earlier. After the plan failed, we had to go back to square one and rethink everything. We had to start over from the beginning. The house sale fell through, so I had to go back to square one. We had to go back to square one after the business went bankrupt. I had to start over the business from the beginning. Idiom 95, set in stone. set in stone, and this means permanently fixed or decided. For example, the schedule isn't set in stone yet, so I can still make adjustments. So here the schedule isn't permanently fixed, it's maybe temporarily set up. We can change it, it's not set in stone, it's not set in stone. Nothing is set in stone yet, so there's still time to change the design. Our decision isn't set in stone yet, so we're open to feedback. So as you can see from these three sentences, set in stone is often used in the negative sense. Something isn't set in stone. Nothing is set in stone, or we can still change it. So if something is set in stone, it's permanently fixed, but we often talk about something as not set in stone yet. Off the top of my head. Off the top of my head is the next idiom, and this means without careful thought or investigation. For example, off the top of my head, I'd say it's about a 2-hour drive to the city. So I don't know exactly. I'm just guessing off the top of my head. Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 possible solutions to this problem. So without investigation, without careful thought, I can think of these solutions. Off the top of my head, I think the answer is 42. But I'm not carefully thinking about it. It's off the top of my head. I'm kind of guessing here. The next idiom, in a rut. In a rut, and this means in a monotonous routine. It's a routine, it's boring, it's monotonous, it's the same thing every day. You often see a rut in a field. If it's been ploughed, then you will see a rut where you plant seeds. And if you're stuck in a rut, you're stuck in that shallow part of the field. I feel like I'm stuck in a rut, doing the same thing every day without progress. Stuck in a rut. We often use that collocation, stuck in a rut. I've been in a rut at work lately, and I need something new to motivate me. She feels like she's in a rut and is considering a career change. Idiom 98. Tick all the boxes. Tick all the boxes. This means to meet all the criteria or requirements. For example, this job ticks all the boxes in terms of what I'm looking for in a career. It meets all the criteria. It meets all my requirements. The house ticked all the boxes in terms of location, size and price. This candidate ticks all the boxes in terms of skill and experience. So this candidate meets all the requirements that we need in terms of skill and experience. Idiom 99. Dig one's heels in. This means to refuse to change one's opinion or actions. Refuse to change. You're going to dig your heels in. You won't change. Despite all the evidence, he dug his heels in and refused to compromise. He refused to change his opinions despite the evidence. He dug his heels in during the negotiation and wouldn't agree to any changes. He refused to change. She dug her heels in and refused to go with me. She refused to change. If you've got this far, well done, congratulations. This is idiom number 100, and it is, on that note. This means following from what was just mentioned. For example, on that note, let's wrap up the meeting and discuss next steps tomorrow. So following on from something that we've just discussed, on that note, we'll finish. On that note, let's finish up for today and pick this up again tomorrow. So following on what somebody has just said, we're going to finish up today. And finally, on that note, I'd like to conclude by thanking you for watching this video. On that note, I'm going to finish the last of the 100 idioms, and well done for watching all of those idioms.